If cloning yourself is 100% more efficient, why do you, me, and almost every complex creature on Earth bother with the messy, exhausting, and incredibly costly process of sexual reproduction?
I mean, it really is the ultimate question. It's a massive biological paradox.
It really is. Seriously, think about the mechanics of it for a second. You have to actually go out and find a partner.
Which is hard enough on its own.
Right. And then you have to convince that partner you are somehow worth their time. You compromise on 50% of your genetic material. You spend this just absurd amount of metabolic energy.
Yeah, the calorie burn alone is wild.
Exactly. And your reward at the end of all of that effort is an offspring that is, well, only half you.
Right. Only half.
Meanwhile, if you look at an organism that simply clones itself, it just hits copy and paste.
Boom.
Done. Yeah, it doesn't need to date, it doesn't need to compromise, and its offspring is a 100% identical reflection of its own successful biology. It just, takes over the neighborhood.
It's just hyper efficient.
So from a purely biological, economic, and strategic standpoint, the way we reproduce makes absolutely zero sense.
It is, without a doubt, the ultimate evolutionary paradox. Because when evolutionary biologists sit down and look at the raw numbers, like the sheer mathematical disadvantage of our reproductive strategy, it's staggering.
It's basically the worst business model ever.
Oh, totally. Sexual reproduction is so wildly inefficient that, frankly, it should have been outcompeted and wiped off the face of the earth billions of years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, a clonal population should just outbreed and outconsume a sexual population in the blink of an evolutionary eye.
Yeah.
And yet, when we look out the window, what do we actually see?
We see mammals, birds.
Exactly. Reptiles, fish, insects, plants. It is the dominant mode of life for virtually all complex multicellular organisms on this planet.
Which is exactly why we are dedicating today's deep dive to unpacking this mystery. Our mission today is to explore the research on what scientists refer to as the genetic lottery.
And it is quite a lottery.
It really is.
Welcome to the deep dive. I'm Satosha.
And I'm Satoshi. We're going to look under the hood of our own biology to figure out why sex, despite being a truly terrible economic investment for the individual, is actually the ultimate path to perpetuity for a whole species.
Yes, the hidden architecture of survival.
Right. And perhaps more surprisingly, we are going to see why cloning, which honestly sounds like an absolute superpower if you want to pass on your genes, is almost always an evolutionary dead end.
And, if you are wondering why this matters to you, sitting there listening right now, it's because your very existence is the result of an unbroken billion-year streak of winning lottery tickets.
A billion years. Just let that sink in.
It's incredible when you begin to understand the sheer mathematical improbability of your own biology and how your body actively, intentionally shuffles its own genetic deck just to stay one step ahead of microscopic threats. I mean, it completely changes your perspective.
It really does.
It changes how you view your own health, how you view the incredible complexity of the natural world around you, and ultimately how you understand your own fragile place in the massive ancient tree of life.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start by looking at the bill, the biological bill. Because to truly appreciate why the evolutionary benefit of our reproductive system is so miraculous, we first have to understand just how insanely expensive the upfront cost is.
And it is a steep cover charge.
Very steep cover charge. I want to talk about a foundational concept in evolutionary biology. The research points to a paradox formulated by the legendary evolutionary biologist John Maynard Smith. He called it the twofold cost of males.
What's fascinating here is that this cost isn't some abstract theoretical penalty. It is a brutal demographic reality.
Yeah.
In a sexually reproducing population, roughly 50% of the individuals, the males, do not directly bear young.
They just don't have the hardware.
Exactly. They consume food, they drink water, they take up physical territory, they burn through the ecosystem's resources, but they do not possess the biological machinery to physically produce an offspring themselves. They only contribute sperm. The females do all the actual reproductive heavy lifting.
Right. So let's visualize this math, and we can do it without getting bogged down in complex formulas or academic jargon.
Please.
I want you to imagine two rival biological startups. Startup A is entirely asexual. The CEO is a female who just clones herself. She has 2 daughters.
Okay, simple enough.
Because they are clones, both of those daughters also have the machinery to reproduce. So they each have 2 daughters. Now you have 4.
Right.
And those 4 each have 2, giving you 8, then 16, then 32, then 64. Every single individual in that population is a factory producing more factories.
It's just explosive exponential growth.
It's a venture capitalist's dream.
Oh, absolutely. The asexual lineage doubles its demographic advantage every single generation. Their reproductive output scales flawlessly because 100% of their population is capable of direct reproduction.
Now, compare that to startup B, which is our sexually reproducing lineage.
Mhm.
A male and a female get together, they pool their resources, and they have 2 offspring.
Okay.
Statistically speaking, one of those offspring is male and one is female. So in the next generation, despite having 2 children, there is still only 1 reproducing female. Just 1 factory.
Still just the one.
Right. She has to go out, expend energy to find a mate, and she has 2 kids. Again, 1 male, 1 female. Generation after generation, the number of actual reproducing females in that lineage stays completely flat. 2 parents make 2 kids who make 2 kids.
Stagnant.
Completely flat. Meanwhile, the asexual clones across the street are geometrically expanding and taking over the entire world.
It is a massive, crippling 50% fitness penalty right out of the gate. If this were a board game, the asexual player is collecting twice as much money every single time they pass away.
Yeah.
Go, while the sexual player is forced to give half their money away just to stay in the game.
I really love the startup analogy because it highlights the absurdity of it.
Yeah.
Imagine running a company where 50% of your employees literally lack the physical capability to manufacture your product,
It'll be a disaster.
but you still have to pay them. You still have to provide them with office space, healthcare benefits, snacks in the break room. That is the biological cost of males.
With huge overhead.
Massive overhead.
Yeah.
Your competitor, the asexual startup, has a highly optimized workforce where every single employee is on the assembly line building the product. In any rational, competitive, free market, your sexually reproducing startup goes completely bankrupt in the first month.
And the truly alarming part for the sexual organism is that this twofold demographic cost is just the baseline penalty.
Wait, there's more.
Oh, there's so much more. It's just the cover charge to get into the club. The research highlights a massive suite of additional compounding penalties that sexual organisms have to pay just to reproduce.
Like what?
Well, consider the sheer energy and time spent simply locating a mate. An asexual organism doesn't search. When the temperature is right and the food is abundant, she just reproduces.
Must be nice.
Right. But a sexual organism has to abandon its foraging, roam across dangerous landscapes, expend thousands of calories, and desperately hope to stumble across a genetically compatible partner of the opposite sex.
Stumbling across them is only half the battle. Then you have to hope that partner actually likes you.
Which is never guaranteed.
Exactly. Which brings up the enormous, often ridiculous costs of courtship.
Let's look at a peacock. We are all familiar with that massive iridescent tail.
Beautiful, but ridiculous.
Totally ridiculous. Think about the physics and the metabolic reality of that tail. It requires an astronomical amount of biological energy to grow those feathers. It is heavy. It is aerodynamically disastrous. It is fundamentally a handicap. The peacock is dragging around this giant heavy tapestry just to prove to the female that he has such robust genetics he can survive despite this massive physical burden.
And it makes them incredibly visible to predators. It's like wearing a neon sign in the jungle that says, "I can't fly away fast enough, please eat me."
Yeah, you're just a sitting duck. Well, a sitting peacock.
Exactly. Or take frogs. A male frog calling for a mate in the middle of a swamp at night is certainly advertising his location to females, but he is also ringing the dinner bell for every single snake, owl, and predatory fish in the entire vicinity.
Right. The act of mating itself, the courtship rituals, the bright colors, the loud noises, they deliberately strip away an animal's camouflage and leave them dangerously vulnerable to predation.
And even if you don't get eaten, there are other risks.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Furthermore, you have to account for the microscopic risks, which are often far more lethal than the macroscopic predators. Mating is the ultimate vector for disease.
Right.
You have 2 separate organisms physically pressing their biological interfaces together, exchanging fluids. For parasites, bacteria and viruses, this is an absolute dream scenario.
It's a free ride.
It is a superhighway for sexually transmitted infections. By simply choosing to mate, an organism is drastically increasing its exposure to pathogens that could sterilize or kill it.
Okay, so let's tally this up. Even if you survive the predators who heard your mating call, and you manage to dodge the viral and bacterial infections during the actual act of mating, you still aren't in the clear.
Not at all.
Because the actual internal cellular mechanics of combining two completely different genomes into one embryo is incredibly precarious. The process, which is called meiosis, is highly complex and highly prone to catastrophic errors.
It's a very delicate dance.
It is. If chromosomes fail to separate exactly right, or if the DNA strands don't fuse perfectly, it leads to severe developmental disorders or the immediate death of the embryo.
Yeah. So if we synthesize all of this data, the picture it paints is deeply confusing. Sexual reproduction actively halves your population's growth rate. It wastes immense amounts of your metabolic energy. It exposes you to lethal predators. It actively spreads debilitating diseases. And it risks critical fatal cellular errors during conception.
It sounds terrible when you list it all out like that.
Right. By every single logical metric we have in biology, an organism that simply clones itself should outcompete a sexual organism instantly, permanently, and universally.
It's a completely wild realization. Asexual reproduction is just undeniably mathematically superior when it comes to raw, efficient output. But, as we were going to see in the research, there is a fundamental flaw in that strategy.
A fatal flaw.
In the long run, raw output without variation is doomed. It is a biological dead end. Speaking of efficiency, as creators, we're always looking for ways to maximize our own output efficiently. Real quick, before we jump into the deep end, if you are getting value out of the show, we request you to check us out on fountain.fm. It's a value-for-value player where you actually get paid for listening without advertisements blocking your experience. It's a great platform. And of course, you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube Music for free, or wherever you get your daily audio boosted series. As for videos, we still need to hit our goal of 1,000 subs on YouTube to start using the Mosaic AI video editor, the one we are talking about in this deep dive. Mosaic is truly a game changer for small creatives like us. It really is. We can feed it a YouTube link and it creates beautiful AI, cinematic captions, infographics, and a whole lot more we're still discovering in our capability tests. We can't be more thankful that you are as fascinated by these deep dives as we are.
It really is an incredible tool.
Sure.
But returning to the biological machinery at play here, we've solidly established that the bill for sex is astronomically high.
Astronomical.
Therefore, the evolutionary payoff must be equally astronomical, or else the behavior would have been naturally selected out of existence eons ago. That ultimate payoff is genetic variation. But to truly grasp why this is so powerful, we need to understand how the body actually achieves this variation on a molecular microscopic level.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics. We need to look at the fundamental difference between two microscopic cellular processes, mitosis and meiosis.
Right.
Mitosis is the standard operating procedure for your body. It's what your body uses to heal a paper cut on your finger, or to grow your hair, or to replace old skin cells. Mitosis is, for all intents and purposes, a highly efficient photocopy machine.
Just duplicates.
Exactly. One parent cell duplicates its DNA and divides into two completely identical daughter cells. If organisms reproduced using only mitosis, which is the fundamental mechanism of cloning, every single offspring would be nothing more than a photocopy of the parent.
Meiosis, on the other hand, is entirely different. It is the specialized, highly restricted process used only to create gametes, sperm, and egg cells.
And it's messy.
Oh, very. If mitosis is a reliable office photocopy machine, meiosis is an intricate high-stakes casino where the dealer aggressively shuffles the deck before dealing every single hand.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, its primary biological directive is not preservation. Its purpose is to actively destroy the specific parental genetic combination and forge something completely novel, something that has never existed before.
And the literature details 3 specific sequential points of intense randomization inside this cellular casino. The first point is a phenomenon known as crossing over. I want you to visualize this because it is beautiful and bizarre.
It really is.
Inside your cells, you have pairs of homologous chromosomes. For every pair, you inherited one from your dad and one from your mom. During the very first stage of meiosis, before the cell even begins to divide, these matching chromosomes seek each other out and line up perfectly alongside one another.
They actually physically embrace. The cellular machinery binds them together tightly, point by point, forming a structure known as a tetrad. The tension at a microscopic level is immense.
Here's where the magic happens. While they're locked in this embrace, they literally break open and swap entire sections of their DNA. To explain this clearly without diving into the complex mathematical variables of the process, I want you to imagine you have 2 stacks of solid metal coins.
Okay, picturing it.
One stack is entirely silver, representing the exact DNA sequence you inherited from your mother. The other stack is pure gold, representing the DNA from your father.
Now, in a normal cloning process, you would just pass on a silver stack or a gold stack.
Right. But crossing over is as if the cellular machinery takes a gold coin and a silver coin, violently melts them down together in a microscopic forge, swaps their halves, and solidifies them again. Yeah, so now when the process is done, you don't have a silver coin or a gold coin. You have a coin that is half gold and half silver. The chromosome that actually gets packaged into the sperm or the egg is a mosaic. It is a completely bespoke combination of genes that has never previously existed in the entire history of the universe.
What is truly profound about this first step is the biological hardware used to accomplish it. The enzymes performing this crossing over the molecular scissors, cutting and pasting the DNA, are the exact same enzymes the body uses to repair double-strand breaks in damaged DNA.
Wait, really? The same enzyme?
The exact same ones. This has led evolutionary biologists to a fascinating hypothesis. The very origin of sex, billions of years ago in single-celled organisms, likely began as a primitive DNA repair mechanism.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. These ancient microbes probably started swapping DNA simply as a desperate measure to fix radiation or chemical damage.
Sure.
The incredible genetic variation that resulted wasn't the goal, it was just a happy accident. But it turned out to be an accident that gave them such an overwhelming survival advantage that it reshaped life on Earth.
A happy microscopic accident that eventually gave rise to every complex animal you see at the zoo. Okay, so crossing over is our first point of randomization in the casino. The second point is called independent assortment.
Yes.
As humans, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. When the cell is finally getting ready to divide down the middle to create that sperm or egg, these 23 pairs line up along the equator of the cell. But they don't line up in an organized fashion. It's not as if all the maternal chromosomes politely line up on the left side and all the paternal ones line up on the right.
Oh, no, it's entirely chaotic chance. For
Yeah.
every single one of those 23 pairs, which side the maternal or paternal chromosome faces is determined independently.
Let's use our coin analogy again. Picture yourself standing at a table and flipping 23 coins in a row. You are trying to get one exact specific sequence of heads and tails. Statistically, the chance of you flipping that one exact sequence is roughly 1 in 8.3 million.
That's a lot of flips.
It is. Because of independent assortment, just by the random way these chromosomes physically line up on the cellular equator, a single human being can produce over 8.3 million entirely unique gametes.
But we have to remember that 8.3 million number assumes that the chromosomes themselves are static and intact.
Oh, right, because of the first step.
Exactly. When we compound this second step with the first step crossing over, where the silver and gold coins have already melted and swapped pieces of metal before they even get flipped on the table, the math just explodes.
It goes off the charts.
Completely. The combinatorial possibilities become so vast that the number of unique sperm or egg cells a single human can theoretically generate is, for all practical purposes, infinite.
Effectively infinite. You could live a billion lifetimes and never produce the exact same sperm or egg cell twice.
Never.
And then we hit the third and final point of randomization. Random fertilization. The casino takes one of those effectively infinite sperm combinations and it blindly crashes it into one of those effectively infinite egg combinations.
The collision of infinites.
Yeah. The resulting zygote, which grew up to be you, the person listening to this deep dive, represents one single specific realized outcome out of trillions upon trillions upon trillions of unrealized possibilities.
When you lay out the mechanics like that, it perfectly sets up a foundational concept in evolutionary theory. It was formulated by the brilliant evolutionary biologist George C. Williams, and he called it the lottery principle.
Okay, let's unpack this. This is one of my favorite analogies in all of science because it makes the math so relatable.
It really does.
Let's imagine survival in the wild is a lottery. If you are an asexual organism, your reproductive strategy is equivalent to walking into a convenience store and buying 100 lottery tickets.
Seems like a solid strategy.
It sounds great, right? You have high output, but because you reproduce via mitosis, because you are just a photocopy machine, every single one of those 100 tickets has the exact same sequence of numbers printed on it.
Now, if the environment you live in remains perfectly static, if the temperature never fluctuates, if no new predators ever migrate into your territory, if the rainfall is perfectly consistent and your specific genetics happen to be the winning numbers for that static environment, you win massive.
You take the whole jackpot.
You dominate the ecosystem entirely because your clones are perfectly optimized for that exact moment in time.
But here is the brutal reality of planet Earth. The environment is never, ever static.
Never.
The climate shifts. A sudden cold snap hits. A new species of aggressive predator migrates over the mountain range. A severe drought dries up the local pond. When the environment changes, the winning lottery numbers change.
And then what happens to the clones?
Well, because the asexual organism bought 100 tickets with the exact same numbers, their entire clonal lineage goes completely bankrupt overnight. They have no genetic flexibility. They are wiped out in a single stroke of ecological bad luck.
Sexual reproduction, viewed through the lens of the lottery principle, is the ultimate biological bet hedging strategy.
Bet hedging. I like that.
Yeah, a sexually reproducing organism might only have the metabolic resources to buy 50 lottery tickets instead of 100, precisely because they are paying that crippling twofold cost of males. They have half the output.
Right.
But thanks to the chaotic casino of meiosis, the crossing over, the independent assortment, the random fertilization, every single one of those 50 tickets has a totally different, entirely unique sequence of numbers printed on it.
Let's be clear, most of those 50 tickets are still going to be losers.
Oh, absolutely.
In a changing environment, some of your offspring will inherit combinations that make them too slow to escape the new predator. Some will lack the cold resistance to survive the new frost. They will die.
It's harsh.
It is. But because you have 50 completely unique randomized combinations out there in the wild, the mathematical probability that at least one of those offspring randomly possesses the new winning ticket is drastically higher.
If we connect this to the broader macroscopic picture of evolution, it beautifully explains the paradox we started with. Cloning is an absolutely fantastic short-term strategy for rapidly exploiting a stable resource.
Right.
But it is a terrible long-term survival strategy. Clones are fundamentally fragile to change. Sex is the exact opposite. Sex actively sacrifices short-term demographic efficiency, paying exorbitant costs in order to purchase long-term ecological resilience.
I'm really starting to see the architecture here. Sex gives us the genetic variation we need to adapt to external changes in the environment, like shifting weather or new predators.
Precisely.
But as we dig deeper into the research, evolutionary biologists point out a threat that is much more insidious than a changing climate. What happens internally? What happens to a species' actual DNA code when they completely stop shuffling the deck?
This is a phenomenal question, and it transitions us into the realm of genomic housekeeping. It brings us to a terrifying genetic phenomenon known as Muller's ratchet, named after geneticist Hermann Joseph Muller.
Muller's ratchet sounds ominous.
It is. This concept is fundamentally about the inevitable, irreversible accumulation of deleterious, which is a fancy biological word for harmful mutations.
To really grasp the horror of Muller's ratchet, we need an analogy. I want you to think back to the 1990s, to the days of VHS tapes.
Oh, the good old days of tracking static.
Exactly. Imagine you have a pristine master copy of your absolute favorite movie. The picture is crisp, the audio is perfect. You want to give a copy to your friends, so you hook up 2 VCRs and record from one tape to the other.
Right.
The new copy is pretty good, but because it's an analog copy, maybe the audio is a tiny bit fuzzier. A little bit of static got introduced. Then your friend wants to share it, so they make a copy of their copy. And someone down the line copies that one.
We all remember what those look like.
Barely watchable. Every single time you duplicate the tape, a tiny bit of static, a tiny glitch, a tracking error is permanently baked into the new version.
In a clonal asexual lineage, the organism's entire genome is that single VHS tape.
Right.
Because they don't have sex, their entire genetic code is inherited from generation to generation as one massive, indivisible block.
Right.
Every time a cell divides, the DNA must be copied. And natural copying errors, which we call mutations, inevitably occur. This is a fundamental law of physics and chemistry. Nothing copies perfectly forever. Now, most mutations are neutral. They don't do much. But when they do have an effect, they are almost universally slightly harmful. Over countless generations, these mildly harmful glitches inevitably build up on the tape.
And because they don't engage in meiosis, because they don't have that biological casino to swap pieces of the tape around, cut out the static, and rebuild a pristine master copy, they are permanently stuck with every single glitch that ever happens to them.
Exactly. Let's look at how the population dynamics work here. In any given asexual population, there is a specific group of individuals who happen to possess the absolute fewest number of mutations. Biologists refer to this pristine group as the least loaded class.
So they are the cleanest tapes.
Yes, the cleanest tapes. But We exist in a finite world with random chaos. A lightning strike, a sudden flood, or a random foraging predator can accidentally wipe out that entire least loaded class purely by bad luck. It
Wow.
has nothing to do with their fitness. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Once that pristine class is dead, they're gone forever. You cannot unmutate a clone. The new baseline for the entire population is now the group that has, say, 1 or 2 mutations.
And the ratchet clicks forward. It locks into place.
The ratchet clicks forward. And the terrifying mechanism of a ratchet is that it physically cannot click backward. The overall genetic load of the population irreversibly increases. The tape gets fuzzier and fuzzier.
It's grim.
Eventually, as the generations pass, the slow accumulation of these harmful mutations leads to a noticeable decline in the overall health and fitness of the organisms. Because they're less fit, they don't reproduce as well, and the total population size begins to shrink. And here's the fatal feedback loop. A smaller population size makes it mathematically much easier for the next least loaded class to be wiped out by random chance.
The degradation accelerates.
It accelerates wildly into an event that evolutionary biologists call a mutational meltdown. The glitches totally overwhelm the physiological machinery, the tape becomes unwatchable static, and the entire species simply blinks out of existence, driven to extinction by its own internal errors.
And this isn't just a theory, right?
No, not at all. The data shows this has been practically proven and observed in laboratory settings. Scientists have taken populations of RNA viruses and certain bacteria, artificially suppressed their rare abilities to exchange genetic material, and watched as Muller's ratchet inevitably drives the isolated lineages to rapid extinction.
So if we look at it this way, asexual organisms aren't just vulnerable to external changes. They're essentially ticking time bombs of internal genetic rot. The clock is always counting down to meltdown.
Exactly.
But how does sex actually fix this? If we are all mutating all the time, how do sexual organisms manage to reverse the ratchet and clean the tape?
This is where we encounter the deterministic mutation hypothesis, a brilliant framework primarily championed by an evolutionary biologist named Alexei Kondrashov. To understand how sex cleans the genome, we first have to understand a genetic principle called synergistic epistasis.
Okay, that is a heavy piece of academic jargon. Synergistic epistasis. Let's break that down into plain English. What does that actually mean for the physical organism walking around in the world?
The easiest way to visualize synergistic epistasis is to imagine your car. Imagine you are driving down the highway and you run over a nail, giving you a flat tire.
Annoying, but manageable.
Right. That flat tire represents one deleterious mutation. It is highly annoying, your car is vibrating, it slows you down significantly, but if you drive carefully on the shoulder, you can still limp along and eventually get home.
Right.
Now imagine a few miles later, you get a second flat tire on the other side. Yeah. The impact on your ability to drive the car is not just doubled, it is exponentially worse.
Right, yeah. You're barely moving.
The steering is ruined, the axle is dragging. If you get 3 or 4 flat tires, the car is totally immobilized. It is dead. Synergistic epistasis means that in complex biological networks, mutations don't just add together, they compound. Each additional harmful mutation causes a disproportionately larger compounding drop in the organism's fitness than the one before it, because biological systems rely on interconnected pathways.
I see. So if an asexual organism gets that 4th flat tire, its biological pathways collapse and it's just dead on the side of the evolutionary road. It's out of the gene pool.
Precisely.
But how does sexual reproduction act as the mechanic here to prevent the whole population from getting 4 flat tires?
It all comes back to the casino of meiosis. Because sexual reproduction forcefully shuffles the genetic deck every generation. Let's say you have a male and a female parent. They're both doing okay, but they each carry a few scattered, mildly harmful mutations. Maybe a flat tire here, a dented bumper there.
Okay.
When they reproduce, through the chaos of crossing over an independent assortment, they are shuffling their genes. By pure statistical chance, they might produce one offspring that miraculously inherits almost none of the bad mutations from either parent.
A totally clean car?
A completely clean car. That offspring gets all the good code. They are incredibly fit, pristine, and ready to thrive.
But wait, if it's completely random, the exact opposite must also be true. They might also produce an offspring that has the terrible luck of inheriting almost all of the bad mutations from both the mother and the father.
Precisely. And that is the brutal hidden elegance of the system. Sex acts as a mechanism to gather up the scattered genetic garbage and concentrate it into a few highly unfortunate, severely unfit individuals.
Oh, wow.
Those individuals are born with 4 flat tires. And nature, through the completely unsentimental, brutal reality of natural selection, simply deletes those heavily mutated individuals.
They just don't make it.
They don't. They're too slow, too weak, or too sick to survive. They get eaten by predators or succumb to disease before they can ever reproduce. By actively generating and then sacrificing those few heavily mutated individuals, the sexual population as a whole effectively purges vast amounts of genetic trash from the collective gene pool in a single generation.
That is mind-blowing and honestly a little dark. By shuffling the deck, sex intentionally takes all the scattered static from a bunch of OK VHS tapes, concentrates all that static onto one completely unwatchable tape, throws that terrible tape into the incinerator, and leaves the remaining tapes in the population much, much cleaner.
It literally rotates Muller's ratchet backward.
It is the ultimate form of harsh, uncompromising genomic housekeeping. Without this brutal mechanism of concentrating and purging errors, the massively complex interconnected genomes of multicellular life, like humans, mammals, birds, would inevitably degrade into total mutational oblivion. We are simply too complex to survive without regular maintenance.
Yes.
That totally reframes how I think about reproduction. So sex is the mechanic that protects us from our own internal genetic rot. But the evolutionary biologists point out that avoiding internal meltdown is only half the battle.
Only half.
Because the biggest, most immediate threat to an organism's survival isn't just its own slow-mutating DNA, it's the microscopic alien enemies that are constantly, aggressively trying to hack into our biology from the outside.
Which seamlessly transitions us from the long-term, slow-moving generational advantages of genetic housekeeping directly into the immediate, frantic, short-term necessity of having sex. This is the domain of one of the most famous ideas in biology, the Red Queen hypothesis.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the narrative shifts from maintenance to warfare. The Red Queen hypothesis gets its name from a specific scene in Lewis Carroll's book, Through the Looking Glass.
Ah, Alice and the Red Queen.
Right. In the story, Alice finds herself running alongside the Red Queen. They are sprinting as absolutely fast as they can, but Alice looks around and realizes the scenery around them isn't moving at all. They are completely stationary. Exhausted, Alice asks what's going on, and the Red Queen turns to her and says, "Now here, you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place."
It is perhaps the most perfect literary metaphor ever applied to a biological reality. It describes a coevolutionary arms race. Specifically, it describes the invisible, never-ending life-or-death arms race between host organisms like us, or a fish or a plant, and the vast armies of parasites and pathogens that feed on us.
To understand why this is a race, think about the sheer generation time difference. Think about the life cycle of a pathogenic bacteria or a virus. A single bacteria can divide and reproduce millions of times in the span of a few days. Every single time it reproduces, there is the chance for a mutation. Every generation is a chance to adapt, to overcome an obstacle. Now look at a human. It takes a human roughly 20 to 30 years to reproduce just once.
We are so slow.
Painfully slow. The pathogens are evolving, iterating, and adapting at warp speed compared to our agonizingly slow generational timeline.
The math seems impossible for the host. If we view the host organism's immune system, the cell walls, the antibodies, the molecular receptors as a complex series of biological locks, the parasites are essentially a billion-strong army of master thieves constantly forging new keys to pick those locks. Because they reproduce so fast, they try millions of different keys every single hour.
So let's put our asexual clonal population back into this hostile scenario. Imagine a forest filled with thousands of identical cloned animals. Because they are clones, every single individual in that entire forest has the exact same biological locks on their cellular doors.
Every single one.
The moment one single fast-evolving parasite randomly mutates the correct key to pick the lock of just one clone, the arms race is over. The parasite now instantly holds the master key for every single individual in that entire population. The clones are absolute sitting ducks. A single specialized pathogen can sweep through the forest like a wildfire and wipe out the entire lineage in a matter of days.
And this is where the sheer, undeniable brilliance of sexual reproduction shines brightest. By forcing the population to constantly, aggressively shuffle the genetic deck every single generation, sexual organisms ensure that every single offspring born into the world has a completely unique, randomized set of cellular locks.
The locks change every generation.
Every time. The parasite might spend a year successfully evolving the perfect key to pick the lock of the parent, but when that parasite tries to infect the newly born child, it hits a brick wall. The locks have all been changed. The key no longer fits. The parasite is forced to start its evolutionary lock-picking process all over again from scratch.
You are intentionally making yourself a moving target. By having sex, you are constantly changing the password to your biology. It means that fundamentally, at its core, sexual reproduction is an immune defense strategy.
Yes, it is.
And the data the biologists have collected provides some incredibly vivid, real-world evidence for this lock-and-key warfare. We have to talk about the snails, the study on the Potamopargus snails in the lakes of New Zealand.
This is a landmark, classic study in modern evolutionary biology. These specific New Zealand snails are highly unique and fascinating to researchers because they have a choice. They can reproduce either sexually by finding a mate, or they can reproduce asexually by cloning themselves.
That flexibility is wild.
It is. The researchers went to these lakes to map out the snail populations, specifically looking at how they interacted with a highly aggressive, sterilizing parasitic worm that lives in the same ecosystem.
The life cycle of this parasitic worm is like something out of a horror movie. If the worm infects a snail, it completely sterilizes it, effectively ending its evolutionary line. But the worm needs ducts to complete its life cycle. The local ducks dive down and eat the infected snails. The parasitic worms survive the duck's digestive tract, reproduce inside the bird, and then the duck poops out millions of new worm eggs into the shallow water near the shore, starting the vicious cycle all over again.
So the shallows are dangerous.
Because ducks only dabble and feed in shallow water, the shallow margins of the lake are an absolute concentrated hot zone for these sterilizing parasites.
So the researchers mapped the lake, and what they found perfectly, undeniably validated the Red Queen hypothesis in real time. Out in the deep water of the lake, far from the shore where the ducks don't feed and the parasite risk is incredibly low, the snail population was overwhelmingly asexual. They were cloning themselves.
Which makes sense.
Mathematically, this makes perfect sense. If there are no parasites actively trying to pick your locks, why on earth would you pay the brutal 50% demographic penalty of creating males? You just clone and dominate the deep water.
But the story completely flips when you look at the shallow water. In the shallow margins, right in the middle of the parasite hot zone, the researchers found a massive frequency of male snails, meaning the population there had almost entirely switched over to sexual reproduction.
The clones just couldn't handle the heat.
The asexual clones simply couldn't survive the constant, rapid-fire onslaught of the worms. Their static locks were picked too easily, and they were sterilized into oblivion. The sexual snails, by constantly shuffling their genes and generating rare, novel immune lock combinations, were the only ones who could persist in the crossfire of the Red Queen's race.
The research goes on to highlight similar patterns across the animal kingdom. There is a fascinating study on Mexican desert top minnows. These are small fish that live in highly isolated, harsh desert pools. Just like the snails, some pools contain purely clonal populations, while other pools contain sexually reproducing populations.
Okay, let me guess. The parasites favor the clones.
Exactly. The researchers dragged their nets through these pools and observed that the clonal minnows were absolutely riddled with black spots, which are highly visible cysts formed by a devastating parasitic worm.
Okay, we're just covered in them. But when they pulled up the sexually reproducing minnows who were swimming in the exact same geographic region, exposed to the exact same water and the exact same worms, those sexual fish stayed incredibly healthy.
That's a stark contrast.
They barely had any black spots on them at all. Their genetic shuffling kept them one step ahead of the worms.
And we see the same definitive proof in controlled laboratory environments. Scientists took populations of C. elegans roundworms and exposed them to a rapidly co-evolving pathogenic bacteria. The groups of roundworms that were genetically restricted by the scientists to self-fertilizing, which is functionally identical to cloning, were rapidly overwhelmed by the bacteria and went completely extinct.
Wow. Wiped out.
Completely. However, the worm populations in the exact same petri dishes that were allowed to reproduce sexually actively adapted to the bacterial threat, survived the onslaught, and persisted generation after generation.
The key to this vote of confidence is the research we share on our website.
Exactly.
No login needed, no cookies, no trackers, and absolutely no advertisements. So please, if you want to dig deeper into the numbers, check the link in the descriptions, because today is a big one. Huge.
It really is a mountain of data that is worth looking at. Because what all those empirical numbers from the snails, the fish, and the worms conclusively prove is that the Red Queen hypothesis isn't just an elegant, poetic metaphor created by biologists. It is a brutal, observable reality of nature.
The tax is worth it.
Yes. The immense fitness benefit of surviving a lethal parasitic infection vastly outweighs the crushing 50% demographic penalty of creating males. You gladly pay the tax if it keeps you alive.
Okay, so let's recap our biological ledger. Sex acts as an internal janitor, cleaning up our accumulating genetic code via Muller's ratchet, and it builds an active, dynamic firewall against external parasites via the Red Queen.
Two massive benefits.
But the data reveals a third massive structural advantage to the casino, and this one is all about the speed of innovation. It's about how sex solves the massive traffic jam of evolutionary progress. Biologists call this the Hill-Robertson effect.
Yes, this dives deep into the population mechanics of how highly advantageous beneficial mutations actually spread through a species over time. In an asexual population, evolutionary progress hits a massive bottleneck known as selective interference, or clonal interference.
Let's visualize this traffic jam. Imagine you have a vast, sprawling population of completely asexual clonal organisms. Let's say there are bacteria living in a massive vat.
Okay, a big vat of clones.
Suddenly, purely by random mutational chance, individual A on the left side of the vat develops a truly fantastic mutation. Maybe its cellular machinery figures out how to digest a completely new, abundant food source. Individual A is highly successful, it starts reproducing rapidly, and its specific clone lineage begins growing and taking over the vat.
But simultaneously, over on the complete opposite side of the vat, individual B develops a different but equally fantastic game-changing mutation. Maybe individual B suddenly becomes highly resistant to extreme heat.
Now, if these were sexually reproducing organisms, the solution is obvious. Individual A and individual B would eventually meet, mate, combine their genes, and boom. In a single generation, you have an offspring with both superpowers. You have a heat-resistant, super-digesting marvel.
The ultimate bacteria.
Exactly. But these are clones. They don't mate. They do not share information.
Because they are asexual, the lineage of A and the lineage of B are completely isolated from one another. In fact, they are now in direct hostile competition with each other for space and resources. They physically cannot merge their genetic innovations. Eventually, one of those amazing mutations is going to outcompete the other. Let's say the food-digesting lineage of A is slightly faster. It wins the war.
So the whole vat is eventually filled with the lineage of A. They can all eat the new food. But that means individual B and its incredible heat resistance mutation went extinct. That innovation is lost to history.
Right, and here is the bottleneck. The only way for an individual in this asexual population to eventually possess both superpowers is if the winning lineage of A, after it has already taken over the entire population, sits around and waits to randomly mutate that exact same heat-resistant trait all over again.
That could take forever.
It could. Evolutionary biologists call this sequential fixation. You have to wait in line for good mutations to randomly strike the same exact lineage one at a time.
It's infuriatingly slow. It's like having two unbelievably brilliant engineers working at the exact same tech company, but they are in rival, siloed divisions, and they absolutely refuse to speak to each other.
That's a perfect analogy.
One engineer invents the ultimate high-capacity battery. The other engineer invents the ultimate high-efficiency motor. But because they refuse to collaborate and share their blueprints, the company has to wait decades for the battery engineer to randomly reinvent the motor from scratch. It slows the overall rate of progress to an absolute crawl.
Sexual reproduction shatters this interference entirely. In some circles, this accelerating power is called the Vicar of Bray effect. Through the mechanics we discussed earlier, crossing over and genetic recombination beneficial alleles that arise in completely isolated, different ancestors can be brought together and combined into a single superlineage almost instantly.
To use the analogy, sexual reproduction is the company Christmas party. The two rival engineers go to the open bar, have a few drinks, start chatting, realize they have complementary technologies, swap their blueprints on a napkin, and the very next morning, the company begins manufacturing the revolutionary machine.
Exactly.
Sex allows multiple advantageous traits to spread and combine through a population simultaneously, rather than waiting in a sequential evolutionary traffic jam.
Now, I have to point out that this raises a very important, highly debated question among geneticists. There is a recognized caveat here known as the recombination load. We've praised the casino for shuffling the deck to combine good cards. But the inherent risk of aggressively shuffling a deck is that you can very easily accidentally break apart a really good hand of cards that natural selection spent thousands of years painstakingly assembling.
That's a great point. I mean, if you were sitting at the poker table and you hold a perfect straight flush, the absolute last thing you want to do is ask the dealer to take 3 of your cards back and give you random new ones. You want to freeze that hand.
Precisely. The recombination load is the penalty paid when sex accidentally breaks apart highly optimized genetic combinations. However, when we look at the sheer undeniable persistence of sexual reproduction across the macro history of the tree of life, the conclusion is inescapable. The massive benefit of rapidly assembling novel, high-fitness combinations and overcoming that clonal traffic jam drastically, overwhelmingly outweighs the risk of occasionally breaking up a good hand.
It really puts the entire history of life into perspective. It explains why complex life forms with eyes and brains and immune systems were able to evolve at all. If we were trapped in the asexual traffic jam, relying on sequential fixation, the accumulation of the billions of beneficial traits required to build a human would be moving at a microscopic snail's pace.
We'd still be slime.
We would probably still be single-celled sludge sitting in a warm puddle, waiting millions of years for 3 good mutations to randomly happen in the exact same unbroken line. Sex was the accelerator pedal for complexity.
But, as with virtually any grand sweeping rule in biology, there are exceptions. And these exceptions are absolutely fascinating because they challenge and stress test everything we've just spent the last hour discussing.
Yes, the rule breakers, the evolutionary rebels. The research affectionately refers to them as the ancient asexual scandals. If asexuality is supposed to be a guaranteed evolutionary death sentence, if the genetic rot of Muller's ratchet and the relentless parasitism of the Red Queen are inevitable laws of nature, what on earth do we make of the creatures that have seemingly brazenly cheated the system?
The most famous, widely studied example of an ancient asexual scandal is the bitiloid rotifers. These are microscopic aquatic animals. They live in freshwater pools, mosses, and damp soil all over the world. And according to extensive analysis of both the fossil record and modern genomic sequencing, they have existed as an exclusively purely asexual group for over 40 million years.
40 million years. That is an incomprehensible stretch of time to survive without sex. No males have ever been found, no meiosis, just 40 million years of nonstop cloning.
Not a single male.
They have even diversified into over 450 distinct, recognizable species. By all the strict biological laws we just outlined regarding mutational meltdowns and parasitic arms races, the batiloid rotifers should have melted into genetic puddles or been entirely consumed by fungi millions of years before humans even existed. How do they dodge the evolutionary Grim Reaper?
It turns out they don't break the laws of biology. They have just evolved some truly bizarre, extreme biological workarounds to satisfy them. Let's look at how they handle the Red Queen's parasites first. When a batiloid rotifer is threatened by a lethal, rapidly co-evolving parasitic fungus in its microscopic puddle, it doesn't try to out-evolve it using the genetic lottery. It simply packs up its bags and leaves the battlefield.
Wait, it just runs away?
Sort of. They use a survival mechanism called anhydrobiosis, which sounds like alien technology. When the environment gets dangerous or dries up, they literally expel almost all the water from their bodies and shrivel up into a tiny, completely inert, microscopic husk called a ton. They halt all measurable metabolism. They become a biological statue.
That is insane.
And in this totally dried up, suspended state, they become incredibly lightweight. So light, in fact, that they simply blow away in a stiff breeze. They can be carried by the wind for miles, eventually landing in a new, uninfected puddle where they rehydrate and resume their lives.
So they just peace out on the wind.
Furthermore, they can survive in this desiccated ton state for years, sometimes decades. The parasitic fungus that was trying to kill them, however, cannot survive desiccation. So the rotifer literally outlasts its enemy by going into deep suspended animation, letting the parasite die of starvation, and effectively resetting the Red Queen's arms race by moving through space and time.
It's like trying to survive a zombie apocalypse by freezing yourself in a block of carbonite for 50 years until all the zombies rot away, and then unthawing yourself to claim the empty world. It is a stunning evasion strategy.
It's very effective.
But what about the internal threat? What about Muller's ratchet? You can run from a fungus, but you can't run from your own mutating DNA. How do they stop the genetic glitches from building up and melting them down if they never cross over?
If we connect this to the bigger molecular picture, it turned out they do mix up their DNA to purge mutations. They just don't do it through traditional reproductive sex. They rely heavily on a deeply strange process called horizontal gene transfer, or HGT.
This is essentially microscopic zombie DNA theft.
Essentially, yes. As the rotifers are going into their dried-up ton state, or as they are rapidly rehydrating, their cellular membranes become temporarily stressed and highly permeable. During this chaotic process, their own DNA actually fractures and breaks into pieces.
Ouch.
During this incredibly vulnerable window, they sweep up and absorb stray fragments of environmental DNA that happen to be floating in the puddle around them. DNA from dead bacteria, from fungi, even from decaying plant matter, and they physically splice and incorporate those foreign genes directly into their own genome.
That is absolutely wild. They don't waste energy dating or mating with other rotifers. They just scavenge raw genetic variation from completely different kingdoms of life to simulate the casino effect of sex.
And because their DNA routinely shatters into fragments every time they dry out, they have been forced to evolve unbelievably robust, hyper-efficient DNA repair mechanisms. This is why they are famous for being able to survive massive, otherwise lethal doses of ionizing radiation. When they rehydrate, their repair enzymes furiously patch their shattered chromosomes back together. Researchers strongly suspect that they use a molecular process called gene conversion during this frantic repair phase to actively identify and overwrite harmful mutations, using backup copies of genes to fix errors, which acts as a highly effective asexual substitute for meiotic crossing over.
So when you look at how insane their biology has to be to pull this off, they are really the exception that proves the rule. They only managed to survive 40 million years without sex because they evolved the ability to turn to dust, blow away in the wind to escape parasites, and literally steal genes from plants to patch their mutating code. It's an evolutionary tightrope.
You're very precarious.
What about the other supposed scandals? The research mentions thymus stick insects in California and tiny crustaceans called Darwinulid ostracods.
Yes. These are ancient lineages that scientists for many decades confidently declared were purely 100% asexual. But science is always advancing. With the advent of cheap, hyper-accurate modern genomic sequencing, the story of these scandals is rapidly changing. Researchers diving into their DNA have recently found what they humorously refer to as whiffs of sex hidden in these populations.
Whiffs of sex. I love that phrase. What does a whiff of sex look like in a genome?
It means they aren't completely strictly abstinent. In some of these supposedly ancient asexual stick insect species, field scientists spending thousands of hours searching will very occasionally find extremely rare, fully functional males. Or bioinformaticians will look deep into the sequenced genome and find undeniable statistical evidence of rare, ancient recombination events, the unmistakable fingerprints of crossing over.
So the reality is, they might clone themselves for 1,000 generations, riding that massive demographic advantage, but then they have one wild weekend where a rare male appears, they reproduce sexually, shuffle the deck, and that one single event is enough to clear out the accumulated mutational trash, reset the locks for the Red Queen, and buy the lineage another 1,000 generations of safe cloning.
Exactly. The takeaway from the scandals is profound. Even the most successful clones in the history of the Earth need some mechanism to mix up their DNA eventually. Complete genetic stagnation is always fatal.
So what does this all mean? Let's step back and look at the grand chessboard. If cloning is clearly the best strategy for short-term population booms and resource domination, and sex is the absolute requirement for long-term resilience and mutational cleaning, what is the ultimate perfect play for a species?
If you could design an organism from scratch, the ultimate optimal strategy, which is clearly highlighted in the macroevolutionary data, might not be obligate sex, which is what we do, where you are forced to have sex every single time you reproduce. The perfect strategy is facultative sex, flexibility, the ability to choose your weapon.
Like the Daphnia, the little microscopic water fleas.
Yes. Daphnia and also certain highly adaptable rotifer species have achieved the absolute best of both biological worlds. They read their environment. When times are great, the pond water is warm, the algae food source is abundant, and parasite levels are low, they reproduce entirely asexually. They leverage that massive twofold demographic advantage, they don't waste energy making males, and they rapidly multiply to dominate the entire ecosystem.
They just print the money while the market is booming.
But the very moment the environment begins to turn, maybe the summer ends and the water temperature plummets, or food gets scarce, or the water chemistry changes, that environmental stress triggers a profound physiological switch inside the females. They suddenly alter their development, they start producing male offspring, and the entire population pivots to sexual reproduction.
They sense the winter coming, so they immediately start buying those varied lottery tickets. They know the environment is about to get unpredictable and dangerous. And the research shows that the burst of genetic variation generated by this sudden sexual reproduction quickly assembles new, tough, well-adapted genotypes. Some of those unique offspring survive the winter freeze. And then, once spring comes and the population settles into the newly stabilized environment, they switch right back to efficient cloning.
It perfectly elegantly illustrates that the evolutionary function of the genetic lottery is most critical during times of crisis, stress, and environmental transition. It is an emergency protocol.
Yeah.
But this raises a glaring, somewhat frustrating question for us. If facultative sex switching back and forth is clearly the most optimal, mathematically superior strategy, why are humans, and indeed all mammals, all birds, obligately sexual? Why can't we just clone ourselves when times are good and we have plenty of food?
The macro view of the tree of life answers this, and it introduces a fascinating concept called lineage selection. When evolutionary biologists zoom out and look at the massive, sprawling evolutionary tree of life over hundreds of millions of years, they notice a distinct visual pattern. Asexual lineages are incredibly twiggy.
Twiggy is a fantastic visual descriptor for the data.
They pop up constantly because it only takes one random broken mutation in meiosis for a species to suddenly lose the ability to have sex and become a cloner. And when that happens, because they no longer pay the cost of males, they often experience a massive, rapid population explosion. They outcompete their sexual cousins, they form a little, fast-growing twig branching off the main tree, but because they lack the structural diversification that sex provides, they are fundamentally brittle. They grow fast, but they hit a mass extinction event, a climate shift, or a new parasite. Because they can't adapt, the entire twig snaps off and dies.
Meanwhile, the sexual lineages, though they grow much slower and pay heavy metabolic taxes, form the deep, persistent, unbreakable roots and the thick, massive branches of the tree of life. They endure the storms.
So, the incredible realization is that the complex creatures that dominate the Earth today, including us humans, are the descendants of lineages that were essentially physically trapped into having sex. We couldn't escape it, even if it was economically advantageous in the short term. In mammals, for example, the mechanism of sex is so deeply structurally intertwined with our basic embryonic development through complex genetic processes like genomic imprinting, where we absolutely require specific active genes from both a father and a mother just to grow a functional placenta, that we literally cannot lose the ability to have sex without the embryo immediately dying. We are locked in. If our mammalian ancestors millions of years ago could have dropped sex to gain a quick demographic advantage, they probably would have. But if they had, they would have become a brittle twig, and they would have been wiped out by a parasite or an ice age a million years later.
We survived to build civilizations precisely because our biology prevented us from taking the easy, efficient way out. Sex is the ultimate, non-negotiable evolutionary insurance policy. It brutally forces us to pay a massive, exhausting premium every single generation. But that premium guarantees that the lineage won't go bankrupt when the world inevitably, violently changes.
That is such a profound, humbling way to look at our own biology. For billions of years, the outcome of the genetic lottery was left strictly to the unpredictable, unforgiving chaos of chance. Meiosis, the crossing over of the chromosomes, the random fertilization, it was all completely out of our hands. We were just along for the ride. But today, you and I are living in a fundamentally, radically different era. For the first time in the history of life on Earth, humans are actively developing technologies like CRISPR, advanced cloning techniques, and hyper-precise genetic engineering.
We're no longer just playing the lottery, we're learning how to read the tickets, and more importantly, how to rewrite the underlying code itself.
Exactly. We are taking the pen from nature's hand. So here's a provocative thought for you to take away and chew on. If humanity eventually takes full, deliberate control of our own genetic destiny, if we decide to completely bypass the messy, error-prone, unpredictable casino of sexual reproduction in order to explicitly, perfectly engineer our offspring to avoid all genetic disease, maximize intelligence, and optimize physical traits, could we accidentally walk ourselves right into the exact same evolutionary trap as an asexual lineage? By trying to outsmart nature, by trying to cheat the very lottery that brought us here and engineering the perfect static human genome, will we inadvertently strip away our chaotic resilience? Will we make ourselves a monolithic, stagnant target for the Red Queen's microscopic armies and accidentally engineer ourselves into becoming the ultimate evolutionary dead end?
It is a truly terrifying and endlessly fascinating threshold we are currently standing on. The choices we make in the next century could alter the trajectory of our species forever.
It really is the ultimate question of our time. Thank you for joining us on this deep exploration of the biological casino. Invite you to comment and join us if you have expertise in evolutionary biology or bioinformatics, which we talked about in the show today. And finally, keep searching, keep the quest on. See you on the next deep dive.
I'm Satosha.
And I'm Satoshi.